I should have realized something was wrong the moment I walked into the house. The silence was strange, too quiet compared to the usual arguments between my husband, Vincent, and his son, Benny. My stomach churned as I moved toward the study, drawn by the faint sound of voices. It's the perfect solution. She'll never suspect a thing. Vincent's voice came through, low but filled with a chilling confidence. My heart raced as I leaned closer to the door, holding my breath. Then Benny spoke, his tone sharp and calculating. Are you sure this poison will work slowly? I don't want her dying too fast before we can get access to her assets. I froze, my blood turning cold. My hand flew to my mouth to keep from gasping out loud. My mind spun, trying to make sense of the horrifying words I'd just heard. They were plotting against me, planning to take my life. The realization left me paralyzed with fear. Suddenly, the doorknob turned. I jumped back, struggling to steady my breath as Vincent stepped out. His eyes narrowed briefly when he saw me, but then his lips curled into a sickening smile. "There you are, dear," he said smoothly. Benny and I were just discussing some business matters. His words felt like poison themselves, so casual yet so deceptive. Benny followed behind him, his cold, calculating gaze sweeping over me, like a predator sizing up its prey. "Is everything all right?" Vincent asked, his tone laced with fake concern. He placed a clammy hand on my shoulder, sending a shiver down my spine. "You look a little pale." I swallowed hard, forcing myself to stay calm even though fear and anger raged inside me. My chest felt tight, and my mind screamed at me to run, but I managed to hold it together. "I'm fine," I lied, my voice strained. I forced a weak smile, trying to hide the chaos boiling within me. "Just feeling a bit lightheaded, that's all." Vincent's brow furrowed, pretending to care. "Why don't you sit down and have some water?" he said, guiding me toward the kitchen. "I'll make you something to eat." His words sent a fresh wave of dread through me. Was this part of their plan? Was he about to poison me now? The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as my mind raced with possibilities. Could they really go this far? For money, for greed? My own family? The thought was almost too much to bear. I watched in silence as Vincent moved around the counter, acting as if nothing was wrong. His casual attitude felt like a slap in the face. When I glanced at Benny, his eyes were locked on me, cold and calculating, like a predator watching its prey. That look sent a chill down my spine, but it also sparked something inside me. A fire. It burned strong and steady, a determination that I would not let them win. I wasn't going to be their victim. If they wanted a fight, they'd get one. I gripped the glass of water Vincent handed me, meeting his gaze head-on. My stare was a silent challenge, but he didn't seem to notice. His arrogance blinded him. "Drink up, sweetheart," he said with that same sickening smile. "You'll feel better in no time." I raised the glass to my lips, but my mind was racing. If they wanted a war, I'd give them one. I wouldn't rest until their twisted plan crumbled and justice was served. In the days that followed, I became a quiet observer, listening carefully for anything that might help me. Vincent and Benny acted as though everything was normal, but their calm only made me more determined. It was my best friend, Julia, who gave me my first glimpse of hope. One afternoon, over coffee, I finally told her what I had overheard. The words spilled out of me. Anger, fear, and disbelief all mixed together. Her eyes widened in shock, but she stayed calm. "We need evidence, Gabrielle," she said firmly. "If we're going to stop them, we need to build a solid case." She was right. I couldn't confront them without proof. I needed a plan. That evening, I started going through our finances with fresh eyes. Slowly, the pieces of their betrayal came into focus: missing funds, shady transactions, hidden debts. Bit by bit, their web of lies began to unravel. At dinner one night, Vincent noticed my focus on the bank statements. "You seem pretty into those numbers," he said casually, though I could hear the edge in his voice. "Find anything interesting?" I met his gaze, careful not to show the anger boiling inside me. "Just doing some financial housekeeping," I replied evenly. His eyebrows lifted in mock surprise, but he shrugged and went back to eating, acting like he didn't care. His indifference only made me more determined. Over the next few weeks, I became an expert at hiding my true intentions. I pretended to be unwell, staying home to dig deeper into their schemes. Every suspicious transaction, every shady deal, they were all documented. Julia was my rock through it all, offering advice and keeping me focused. "We're getting closer," she said one evening as we reviewed the growing pile of evidence. "Soon, we'll have everything we need to take them down." Vincent's smug attitude only fueled my resolve. Did he really think I wouldn't fight back? His arrogance would be his downfall, and I'd make sure of it. If Vincent thought I was a weak, clueless woman who couldn't untangle his web of lies, he was dead wrong. But it was Benny who truly sent chills down my spine. His hatred wasn't subtle. It was cold, sharp, and impossible to ignore. His glares were filled with disgust, and his loathing burned in those lifeless eyes of his. "Better watch your back," he muttered one day as he brushed past me in the hallway, his tone dripping with malice. "Wouldn't want anything unfortunate to happen." The threat wasn't even subtle, just a reminder of the poison running through their veins. Their hatred was vile, dangerous, and growing by the day. But I wasn't about to let them intimidate me. I wasn't some fragile woman who would crumble under their pressure. No, I was stronger than that, reborn, even. Fueled by the need for justice, I was ready to fight back. With Julia's help, I was determined to expose the lies they had worked so hard to hide. I would dismantle everything they'd built, piece by piece, just as they had planned to destroy me. It was only a matter of time before their betrayal was revealed. And when that day came, I wouldn't face it with fear. I would be ready, with a cold, unshakable promise of revenge. Every day, I played my role with precision. I became the perfect picture of a frail, ailing wife, someone they wouldn't see as a threat. My act allowed me to stay unnoticed as I worked to bring them down. "You're looking extra pale this morning," Vincent said over breakfast one day. His voice had a fake concern, but underneath it, he didn't care. He barely even looked at me as he continued eating. I forced a small, weak smile and replied, "Just feeling a bit drained lately." He shrugged, brushing me off. "Well, get some rest. We've got the Benson event this weekend, and I can't have you embarrassing me in front of potential clients." His words were a slap in the face, filled with condescension. I clenched my teeth to keep from snapping back at him. Losing my temper wouldn't help my plans. I needed to stay calm, to play along. In the days that followed, I leaned even harder into my act. I moved slower, let my energy seem to fade, and kept up the appearance of someone too sick to be a threat. "You look like death warmed over," Benny sneered as I shuffled into the living room one afternoon. I sank onto the couch, letting out a tired sigh. "It must be that stomach virus going around," I replied, giving him a tired glare. Benny's face twisted with barely hidden disgust. He muttered something under his breath, something cruel, before storming out of the room. As soon as he was gone, I let my mask drop for a moment. My mind was working nonstop, plotting my next move. Their arrogance would be their downfall, and I was going to make sure of it. I let my act drop for just a moment, a grim smile tugging at my lips. If only Vincent and Benny knew the truth behind my frail appearance. Every cough, every tired sigh, was part of my plan to make them believe I was weak, harmless, and no threat to their schemes. As the weeks passed, I focused on protecting what was mine. With Julia's help, I started moving funds quietly and making arrangements through her trusted contacts. A new identity, complete with fresh documents and a spotless record, was being prepared. When the time came, I'd have a way out of this nightmare. "You've got to hang in there," Julia whispered during one of our secret meetings. Her eyes reflected a mix of worry and determination. "We're almost there." I nodded, my shoulders slumping as I kept up my frail act. "Don't worry about me," I said softly. "Just make sure everything is ready when the time comes." Her jaw tightened, and she gave me a firm nod before leaving. The weight of what we were planning hung heavily between us. At home, I noticed Vincent and Benny growing colder by the day. Their sneers and cruel comments had faded into silence, though their occasional snide glances said it all. Did they suspect I was up to something? Or were they simply waiting for the right moment to get rid of me and take what they thought was theirs? The thought fueled my anger, making me more determined than ever to bring them down. Finally, the night before the Benson event arrived. It marked the beginning of the next step in my plan. As I sat down at the dinner table, Vincent's gaze lingered on me, his expression a mix of annoyance and mock concern. "Well, you certainly don't look fit to attend tomorrow's event," he said, his tone dripping with disdain. "Maybe it's best you sit this one out, dear. We wouldn't want you keeling over in front of everyone." His lips curled into a smug smile, his amusement barely hidden. I looked away, pretending to give in, my face a mask of exhaustion. He probably thought I was defeated, worn down by his control. But inside, I was calm, too calm. This was the quiet before the storm, the final moments before I destroyed his illusions of power. As a wave of nausea crept over me, I steadied myself. Tomorrow, everything would change, and they wouldn't see it coming. I pressed my trembling hands against the edge of the table, taking a deep breath to steady myself. They thought they had broken me, body and spirit, but they were wrong. By the time the sun rose, everything would change. Vincent and Benny would realize that their cruelty had done nothing but awaken a strength they couldn't imagine. With my act of weakness firmly in place, it was time to move to the next step of my plan. They thought I was powerless, but they were about to see how devastating their own arrogance could be. I started small, planting little clues to make it seem like Vincent was having an affair. A faint scent of unfamiliar cologne on his clothes, a smudge of red lipstick on his shirt collar, and whispered phone calls when he thought no one was watching. At first, they didn't notice, but I knew patience was key. Slowly, the seeds of doubt I had planted began to take root. It was Benny who finally snapped. One evening, his anger boiled over, and he confronted Vincent in a fit of rage. "Who is she?" Benny shouted, slamming his fist on the table so hard it made me jump. "Don't even try to deny it. I've seen the proof." Vincent's eyes widened, his face a mix of shock and confusion. "What the hell are you talking about, boy?" he barked. "The lipstick stains, the secret phone calls," Benny spat, his voice sharp with accusation. He leaned forward, glaring at his father with pure hatred. "You're cheating on us, aren't you? Some cheap fling." Vincent's jaw tightened, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw guilt flash in his eyes. But it vanished just as quickly, replaced by a mask of outrage. "How dare you accuse me of something like that?" Vincent roared, slamming both palms on the table, making the plates and cutlery rattle. "I've given you everything, a home, an education, a life of comfort, and this is how you repay me?" The two of them erupted into a shouting match, their words laced with anger and blame. It was chaos, a storm of accusations and denials. I sat back quietly, watching as the rift between them grew deeper. I had orchestrated this moment with care, and now it was unfolding just as I'd planned. Like a chemist carefully mixing volatile chemicals, I had set the stage for their destruction. And now, all I had to do was let the tension between them fester and spread. I had set the stage, carefully introducing the pieces of chaos, and then stepping back to watch it unfold. The explosion of distrust between Vincent and Benny had been inevitable. In the days that followed, the tension between them was suffocating. They could barely look at each other without exchanging sharp words, their conversations laced with thinly veiled accusations. "Where were you so late last night?" Benny snapped one morning over breakfast, glaring at his father with a fire that could burn through steel. "Out handling business," Vincent growled, slamming his coffee mug onto the table. The impact sent steaming coffee spilling over the edge. "Watch your mouth, boy. You have no idea what I've sacrificed for this family." Their arguments grew louder and uglier with each passing day. I stopped paying attention to the specifics, letting the growing animosity wash over me like music. I had composed this symphony of chaos, skillfully planting the seeds of distrust, and now I watched them destroy each other in a crescendo of anger. The results were even better than I had imagined. With their bond in tatters, it was time for the next step in my plan, a final act to push them over the edge. I waited, patient and silent, as the tension between them thickened. All I needed was the perfect moment, the right spark to ignite the fire that would consume them both. And when that moment came, I would be ready. The opportunity presented itself one evening at dinner. The air was heavy with resentment, the silence broken only by the clatter of cutlery and the occasional hostile glare or muttered insult exchanged between Vincent and Benny. Clearing my throat, I forced myself to look small and frail, twisting my hands nervously in my lap. Both of them turned to me, their faces filled with annoyance. "I'm afraid I have some troubling news," I said softly, letting my voice tremble. Vincent's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Out with it," he demanded, his tone sharp. "Don't waste our time." I took a shaky breath, feigning unease. "It's about," I hesitated, swallowing hard as though struggling to find the courage to speak. "It's about the other woman." The words landed like a bomb. The air crackled with anger and suspicion. Vincent shot to his feet, his face contorted in outrage. Benny leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with the triumph of vindication. "You lying, cheating bastard." Benny spat, his voice dripping with venom. The room erupted into chaos. Vincent roared, his fury shaking the very walls, while Benny launched into a tirade of accusations. The rage between them, so carefully stoked by my actions, finally reached its boiling point. I sat quietly in the storm I had created, knowing the final act was now underway. This was the moment I had been waiting for, and I would see it through to the bitter end. "I knew you had someone on the side," I said, my voice calm but cutting. With a single motion, I slid a crumpled photograph across the table. It was one I had carefully staged, making it appear as though Vincent was caught in a compromising situation. His brows furrowed in confusion as he grabbed it, but his face quickly twisted into pure rage. "This," he shouted, slamming the photo on the table so hard it shook. "This is a lie. A twisted, malicious lie." "Is it?" I asked quietly, my tone soft, almost hurt. "Because it would explain so much, your late nights, the secret phone calls, and that strange perfume I keep smelling." Benny shot to his feet, his fists clenched tightly, his face a mask of fury. "You smug, self-righteous bastard," he shouted, advancing toward his father. "You've been cheating this whole time, haven't you? Carrying on with some cheap fling while lying to us." It all happened in a blur. Vincent roared in anger and lunged at Benny. The two of them crashed to the floor, their fists flying and limbs flailing as they wrestled and cursed. The sound of their struggle echoed through the room, raw and savage. I stayed seated, watching the chaos unfold. Let them tear each other apart, I thought, letting the fire of hatred I had kindled consume them both. It seemed only fair. They had built their lives on deceit and cruelty, and now they would destroy themselves with the same venom they'd spewed at me. Vincent finally overpowered Benny, pinning him to the floor in a chokehold. His teeth were bared, his face twisted with primal fury, while Benny's face turned purple under the pressure. I watched, torn between revulsion and satisfaction. This was what I had planned. Every move, every step had led to this moment. When Benny's eyes bulged and his gasps became desperate, I finally moved. I fumbled for my phone and hit the record button. Let them finish their brutal fight, I thought. Let them reveal their true selves. I would document every second of their downfall. When the violence finally stopped, they lay sprawled on the floor, bruised and gasping for air. Their hatred had left the dining room in shambles, a war zone of broken furniture and shattered pride. They stared at each other with raw, unfiltered loathing, and for a moment, the gravity of what they had done seemed to hit them both. A dry, bitter laugh escaped my lips as I slipped the phone into my pocket. It was done. The scene had played out exactly as I had planned. "Well," I said, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside me, a storm fueled by years of pain and anger. "That was quite a performance. I'd say the two of you have given me plenty of reasons to rethink my will. Wouldn't you?" I said, my voice calm but sharp. Their eyes snapped to mine, and for the first time, I saw uncertainty flicker across their faces. Let them wonder, I thought with grim satisfaction. The game was in full swing now, and there would be no winners. only survivors. After their explosive fight, the house was heavy with silence, like a dark cloud hanging over everything. Vincent and Benny moved through the halls uneasily, avoiding each other. They were subdued, like predators licking their wounds. I stayed in the background, quiet but watchful, waiting for the right moment to strike again. With Julia's help, I had already set the next part of my plan in motion. The first step came in the form of a call from Dr. Austin, our family doctor. When I arrived at his office, I leaned heavily on Julia's arm, playing the part of a frail, sick woman barely holding herself together. Dr. Austin greeted me with a look of concern etched into his face. "I'm afraid the test results aren't good," he said, his tone grave. I widened my eyes, feigning shock. "What do you mean? What's wrong?" I asked, my voice trembling. He sighed and shook his head, his expression serious. "It seems your condition is more advanced than we initially thought." "I'm so sorry." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Julia, ever the accomplice, leaned against me, pretending to be overwhelmed with grief. I bit my lip, keeping my face composed, though inside, I felt a spark of satisfaction. This was all part of the plan, a carefully crafted lie to push Vincent and Benny deeper into the trap. Dr. Austin, of course, had no idea he was a pawn in my game. His guilt and worry were genuine, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for using him. Almost. But this wasn't the time for mercy. Not yet. When Vincent and Benny were called to the doctor's office under the pretense of hearing about my condition, their reactions were exactly what I expected. While Julia sniffled beside me, her performance flawless, the two of them sat stiffly, their faces cold and unreadable. There wasn't a trace of compassion or concern in their expressions. "Well?" Vincent said impatiently, glaring at Dr. Austin. "What's the prognosis?" "Just get on with it." The doctor sighed, rubbing his temples as if the weight of the moment was too much. His weariness was genuine, but Vincent's tone didn't waver. No kindness, no hesitation, just raw, selfish indifference. It was almost laughable how easy they were making this for me. They had no idea what was coming next. "I'm afraid the situation is quite serious," Dr. Austin said, his tone heavy with finality. "The tests show that Gabrielle's condition is terminal and progressing much faster than we anticipated." The room fell into a thick, suffocating silence. I kept my gaze low, peering through half-closed lashes to gauge Vincent and Benny's reactions. To my disappointment, their faces remained as unreadable as stone. They sat stiffly, their expressions cold and blank, until I broke the silence. With deliberate calm, I let my voice cut through the tension. "Given the circumstances," I said softly, my voice trembling just enough to sound genuine, "I've decided to make changes to my will." Effective immediately, Vincent's head snapped toward me, his eyes narrowing like a predator's. "Oh," he said, his voice sharp and dripping with false sweetness. "And just what changes are you planning, dears?" I let out a weak, rattling cough, doubling over for dramatic effect. When I straightened, pale and unsteady, I clung to Julia's arm for support. Vincent's jaw tightened, a slight twitch betraying the storm brewing beneath his calm facade. "My entire estate," I said, my voice gaining strength as I locked eyes with them both, "will be left to the Amnesty International Foundation after my death." The silence that followed was deafening. The air seemed to vanish from the room as the weight of my words sank in. I watched with quiet satisfaction as the blood drained from their faces, leaving them pale and stunned. For years, they had treated me like nothing more than a stepping stone to wealth, a convenient means to their selfish ends. Now, with their plans ripped out from under them, they sat frozen, disoriented and vulnerable. It was perfect. Their shock and confusion were the prelude to the grand finale I had been planning all along. Just a few more moves, and this sordid theater of lies and betrayal would reach its explosive climax. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in the house grew even darker. Resentment and desperation hung in the air like a thick, choking fog. Vincent and Benny skulked around like cornered animals, their movements jittery and erratic. They avoided each other as much as they avoided me, their paranoia growing with each passing day. From a safe distance, I watched their unraveling. Their greed, anger, and fear consumed them, eating away at whatever shred of composure they had left. They had no idea that their downfall was being orchestrated right in front of them. Every step they took brought them closer to the inevitable end, and I was ready to watch it all unfold. I had endured every wound they inflicted, and now I could see the effects written clearly on their faces. The smug confidence they once wore had crumbled into desperation and fear. At times, their emotions exploded into uncontrollable rage, shouting accusations and slamming furniture as if breaking things could somehow fix their unraveling plans. When the storms passed, they retreated to their corners, no doubt plotting new ways to regain control. "You deceitful witch," Vincent bellowed one morning, slamming his fist on the kitchen counter so hard that the plates rattled. "This is your revenge, isn't it? Finally showing your true colors." I stared at him blankly, my pale face giving nothing away. He stormed around the kitchen island, his steps heavy with frustration. Up close, the stench of whiskey and sweat clung to him, suffocating and sour. Without a word, I turned and shuffled out of the room, every movement slow and deliberate to maintain my appearance of frailty. Let him yell and rage. His anger couldn't touch me anymore. As my supposed condition worsened, Vincent and Benny's behavior became even more vile. They hurled objects and screamed obscenities with a venom that could have shaken anyone else. But through it all, Julia remained my anchor. Her steady presence and wise advice were a shield against the toxic storms swirling around me. "Stay the course," she whispered one evening as we sat in the guest room, listening to yet another argument erupt between Vincent and Benny on the other side of the door. "They're falling apart, Gabrielle. You can see it." She was right. Their desperation was etched in their faces and burned in their eyes. And as much as I hated what they'd done to me, I couldn't deny the twisted satisfaction I felt. For all their cold indifference and cruelty, they were nothing more than greedy scavengers. Now that the prize, my fortune, had slipped from their grasp, their true selves were on full display. It became clear they'd stop at nothing to get what they wanted. Shady associates began appearing at odd hours, their hushed conversations with Vincent and Benny filled with furtive glances in my direction. I couldn't always make out what they said, but the air of desperation in those exchanges was unmistakable. At the heart of their scheming, I saw something darker than greed. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about power, the primal need to dominate, to reclaim control at any cost. Their growing desperation fueled their willingness to cross any line, no matter how depraved. On more than one occasion, I caught their glances lingering on me, their eyes filled with something both calculating and feral. But I stayed calm, knowing their unraveling would soon reach its breaking point. The pieces of my plan were falling into place, and their growing madness only ensured their downfall. When I came back from an outing with Julia, the signs of their desperation were unmistakable. My things had been rummaged through, drawers left open, documents scattered, and jewelry boxes left ajar. They had invaded every inch of my personal space, searching for something, anything, that might undo the terms of my will. Perhaps they thought they'd find a loophole, or maybe their madness had driven them to simply loot my belongings in frustration. Either way, I saw their actions for what they truly were, the final, desperate flailing of men who knew their fate was sealed. Every frantic move they made only tightened the noose around their necks, hastening the inevitable. Soon, there would be nothing left for them to grasp at, no more schemes, no more desperate acts to save themselves. And when that moment came, I would be waiting, ready to deliver the final blow to their delusions of entitlement. For now, I was content to watch and wait, knowing that karma had already set the wheels in motion. The best reckonings, I had learned, come not with haste, but with the slow and steady hand of fate. The day of reckoning arrived not with an explosion of drama, but with an almost ordinary calmness. One moment, Vincent and Benny were in front of me, hurling threats and obscenities like wild animals, their voices dripping with malice. The next, The door behind me swung open, and the room filled with the heavy presence of law enforcement officers. "Vincent Grayson." "Benyander Grayson," a gruff voice announced, cutting through the chaos like a blade. "You're both under arrest." For a second, the room fell silent. It was as though time itself had stopped. Then, chaos erupted once again. "This is ridiculous." Vincent's voice, usually so polished and controlled, cracked with disbelief. "On what grounds?"
Fraud.
"Extortion." "Attempted murder," the lead officer replied sharply. He glanced at me, and a silent understanding passed between us. "I'm sure the list will grow as we process the evidence." The weight of the accusations seemed to crush them. Vincent and Benny shrank before my eyes, their bluster and arrogance evaporating. Gone were the swaggering bullies who had tormented me. They now looked like scared, cornered animals, reduced to nothing more than petulant children caught red-handed. "You," Benny hissed, his wild, feral eyes locking onto me. His face twisted in rage as he struggled against the officer restraining him. "This is your doing, you vindictive." The rest of his venomous insult was cut short as the officer yanked him back, a firm hand pressing against his chest. His voice dissolved into an angry growl as he was wrestled into submission. I stood motionless, my expression calm, as the scene unfolded before me. The once powerful men who had tried to destroy me were now powerless themselves, their lives unraveling in front of everyone. This wasn't the chaotic, fiery ending I had imagined, but in its quiet, methodical way, it was perfect. Their reckoning had come at last, and there was no escape. I stood quietly, unmoved, as Vincent and Benny were dragged out of my home, their limbs flailing as they resisted in vain. Their glares burned with pure hatred, trying to pierce through my calm exterior. But I felt nothing. No fear, no anger, no pity. Only a deep sense of closure, a release, as if the poison that had lingered in my life for so long was finally being expelled. They were gone, and with them went the dark shadow they had cast over my existence. When the chaos settled, Julia stepped out of the corner and placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "It's over, Gabrielle," she said softly, giving me a reassuring squeeze. "You're free of them." I nodded, though her words barely registered. The weight of what had just happened began to settle over me, rushing in like a wave. It was done. The nightmare was over. Justice had been served in the most poetic way imaginable. Yet, as I stood there, I felt no overwhelming joy, no triumphant victory, just an emptiness, a void where their toxic presence had once been. The authorities moved through the house, carefully collecting and documenting the evidence I had spent months assembling. Every detail of Vincent and Benny's crimes was exposed: fraud, financial schemes, and, most damning of all, their twisted plan to poison me and steal everything I had worked for. With each revelation, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders, the heavy burdens I had carried for so long finally easing. When the investigators finished their work and left, the house felt strangely quiet, almost weightless. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a sense of peace, as if I had been set free from invisible chains. Later that evening, Dr. Austin arrived, his face etched with worry and uncertainty. The guilt in his eyes was unmistakable. He had realized he'd been a pawn in a much larger game. As he stepped inside, he struggled to find the right words. "I don't know what to say, Gabrielle," he began, his voice cracking. "When I found out the truth," I raised my hand, cutting him off with a simple gesture. "Think nothing of it, Julian," I said calmly. "You were just a means to an end." Relief and discomfort flickered across his face, but I had no interest in easing his guilt. He had played his role, and now it was over. The chapter was closed, the poison drained, and my life was finally mine again. "I'm sorry I had to involve you, but it was necessary," I said, my tone calm but firm. Dr. Austin swallowed hard, my words sinking in. I could see the tension slowly leaving his body as he processed the truth. "So, it's true?" he asked, his voice quiet but steady, a spark of understanding breaking through his earlier confusion. "This was all a plan?" A way to expose them and their crimes? A faint smile curved my lips as I stood, feeling a renewed sense of strength and purpose. A woman has to protect herself, Julian. Surely you can understand that. With those parting words, I left the room, leaving behind the role I had played for so long. The fragile, deceived woman was gone. I had shed that skin, stepping into a new chapter of my life, one free of lies and full of endless possibilities. As I walked out onto my sunlit estate, I paused to take it all in. The air felt different, lighter, as though the weight of my past had finally been lifted. A new dawn was rising, and I was ready to embrace it with open arms. My life was mine again, unshackled from the chains of a history I should never have endured. And now, I was free to start over, stronger and more determined than ever.